The thing that immediately irritated me in this whole situation was not even Ted suggesting Nicole for the chief of staff position. It was the fact that he did it before even talking to her. That right there tells me everything about Ted's emotional state right now. He is not making clean decisions anymore. He is moving emotionally first and logically second. And honestly, that is dangerous considering everything Garland is already dealing with after the plasma scandal. When Ted sat there talking to Anita and Vernon about replacing Leah, I actually understood the urgency. Garland is bleeding credibility. Leah created chaos. And now everybody is scrambling to stabilize the hospital before the damage spreads further. Anita and Vernon are clearly in crisis management mode. The emergency meeting proves this is no longer just internal gossip. This is institutional panic. So yes, finding a replacement matters immediately. But Nicole, that recommendation felt personal before it felt professional. And Vernon clocked it instantly. I love that moment because Vernon basically forced Ted to confront the reality of what he was doing. The second Vernon asked, "What does Nicole think about this?" Ted completely froze. That awkward admission that he had not even discussed it with her yet exposed how impulsive this whole thing was. To me, that was the writers quietly showing us Ted's emotional confusion without needing a dramatic speech. Because think about it carefully. If you genuinely believe someone is the best choice for a leadership role, that important, you speak with them first. You discuss their ambitions, their readiness, their interests. Ted skipped all of that. Why? Because I honestly think this recommendation had less to do with Garland and more to do with Ted wanting to pull Nicole closer into his orbit again. That is why Nicole's reaction was so satisfying to me. She immediately called the idea crazy, not rude, not arrogant, just honest. And honestly, I respected her more in that scene than I have in weeks. Nicole knows exactly who she is. She knows what she wants professionally. She is not chasing titles just because somebody places them in front of her. That matters, especially in a world where characters constantly confuse status with purpose. Nicole said she wants to focus on being a psychiatrist. That line may sound simple, but I actually think it reveals emotional maturity that Ted currently lacks. She understands her lane. She understands where her passion lives. And more importantly, she understands that leadership positions are not trophies. They are responsibilities. That is why her mentioning Monica made perfect sense. Honestly, Monica sounds like the obvious choice here. She is already making breakthroughs in cancer research and treatment. That immediately gives her credibility within Garland. More importantly, Monica appears professionally driven without the emotional mess attached. And right now, Garland does not need romance-driven decision-making. The hospital needs stability, intelligence, and trust restored after Leah's disaster. So when fans say Nicole should remain in psychiatry while Monica should become chief of staff, I completely agree. Not because Nicole is incapable, but because capability and suitability are not always the same thing. That distinction matters in real life too, by the way. One of the biggest mistakes people make is assuming someone can do a job simply because they are intelligent or talented. Leadership requires emotional bandwidth, discipline, and detachment. Nicole is already emotionally compromised because Ted still has a psychological hold on her, whether she wants to admit it or not. And that next conversation with Kiel proves it. The second Nicole admits those feelings about Ted return every time she gets into bed, I immediately knew she was spiraling emotionally again. What makes this interesting is that the attraction clearly is not fully romantic anymore. It feels psychological, habitual, physical memory mixed with unresolved attachment. That is far more dangerous because people can convince themselves they are over someone intellectually while their body still reacts emotionally to that person. I actually think the show is portraying that conflict in a surprisingly realistic way. Nicole is trying to function rationally during the day, but intimacy triggers emotional echoes she has not fully dealt with. And Kiel's response is very telling too. He does not mock her. He does not shame her. Instead, he immediately offers himself as the solution. Now, come on. Let us be honest about where this is heading. I absolutely think those two are going to end up tangled in bed again. But here is the problem. I do not think Nicole is sleeping with Kiao because she truly wants Kiao. I think she is trying to silence Ted inside her head. Those are two completely different motivations. And relationships built on emotional substitution almost always explode eventually. That is why the storyline feels messy in a believable way. Nicole is not behaving like a villain. She is behaving like someone emotionally divided. And Ted is making it worse because he refuses to establish emotional boundaries with the women around him. That man is exhausting me. At this point, Ted is hurting everybody because he refuses to fully choose a direction emotionally. Shanice is suffering. Nicole is confused. Even Leslie remains part of the emotional shadow surrounding him. Ted keeps creating emotional openings instead of closures. And honestly, this is why I think Shanice needs to leave him immediately. Not because Ted is evil, but because Ted is unstable emotionally. There is a huge difference. I keep seeing people defend him by saying he cares deeply about multiple people. Fine, maybe he does. But caring about people is not the same thing as protecting them emotionally. Ted keeps operating from guilt, attraction, nostalgia, and ego all at once. That combination destroys relationships. Shanice deserves consistency. And I genuinely do not believe Ted can provide it right now. What worries me most is not even the emotional cheating anymore. It is the possibility that Ted and Nicole eventually fall back into bed together and Shanice catches them in the worst possible moment. Because the show keeps building tension around physical temptation rather than emotional resolution. The danger here is not romance. It is unfinished emotional business. That is why every Ted and Nicole interaction now feels loaded, even when they are discussing work. There is history sitting underneath every conversation. And once people start mixing professional decisions with unresolved attraction, disaster usually follows. Which brings me to the storyline that honestly surprised me the most this week, Martin and Tyrell. And I have to say this clearly. Martin impressed me deeply. The conversation about Tyrell and Jessica having sex could have easily become preachy, judgmental, or awkward television. Instead, it sounds like Martin is approaching it with honesty and responsibility. That matters. Especially because teenage storylines often become either unrealistically sanitized or ridiculously dramatic. But this feels grounded. Martin understands something very important. Young people do not suddenly become responsible because adults avoid uncomfortable conversations. They become responsible when somebody teaches them accountability before consequences arrive. That is why I actually loved Martin discussing protection and reproductive health with Tyrell. Yes, Tyrell feels embarrassed. Of course he does. Most teenagers would, but Martin refuses to let embarrassment become ignorance. That is parenting. Real parenting, not screaming, not threatening, not pretending teenagers are innocent angels who never think about sex. Martin is acknowledging reality while still trying to protect his son's future. And honestly, I wish more television handled these conversations this way, because there is educational value inside this storyline that goes beyond entertainment. One thing Martin said really stood out to me emotionally. Preparing Tyrell for the possibility that Jessica could break up with him once they attend different schools. That was painful, but necessary. Because first love often convinces teenagers that emotion alone can survive distance, change, and personal growth. Sometimes it can. Most times it struggles. Martin is not trying to destroy Tyrell's relationship. He is trying to prepare him emotionally so heartbreak does not completely shatter him later. And honestly, that lesson applies to adults too. People spend too much time teaching children how to chase love and not enough time teaching them how to survive disappointment responsibly. Martin is trying to teach both. That is powerful. And what I appreciate most is that Martin also connects sex with responsibility instead of fantasy. He does not want Tyrell and Jessica becoming parents too young. That concern is not judgment. It is realism. Raising children changes lives permanently. Teenagers rarely understand the emotional, financial, and psychological weight of that reality until it is too late. So yes, this storyline actually carries one of the strongest messages in the entire week for me. Own your choices before your choices own you. Meanwhile, Ted is practically the opposite example right now. Martin is teaching accountability. Ted is avoiding it. That contrast cannot be accidental. One man is trying to guide a young person into emotional maturity. The other is a grown adult still creating emotional chaos because he cannot fully confront his own feelings. And honestly, that is why Ted frustrates me so much more this week than Leah did. Leah caused destruction openly. Everybody saw it. Ted causes emotional destruction quietly through hesitation, through mixed signals, through emotional dependency disguised as concern. That kind of damage is harder to clean up because people keep excusing it until somebody gets hurt badly. And I think Shanice is heading directly toward that heartbreak if she stays.